Greetings fellow Mistwanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. In a video I put out a few weeks ago, maybe it's a couple of months ago now, I covered 8 minor villains that you could consider throwing into your Ravenloft campaign, or potentially some of them for Curse of Strahd, some of them are from Curse of Strahd, and the idea being that these are sort of non-Dark Lords who cause hassle and chaos and could potentially appear and reappear, do a battle, and if they're able to escape they might appear again at some point. For number 8 of the list of 8, I kind of cheated, and instead of saying one person, I said you could consider a bunch of minions of the famous, or should I say infamous, Lich, Azalin Rex. Now Azalin Rex is, I'd say obviously probably the most famous Dark Lord of Ravenloft is going to be Count Strahd von Zarovich, but Azalin Rex is probably a very close second. And if you've read things like the Ice Strahd novels and the sequel, The War Against Azalin, you get a really good taste and flavour for Azalin. I probably will do a video dedicated just to Azalin at some point. He's going to be the BBEG in my campaign. And I've already talked about the setup of this in the Faran zal'honan video. So Faran is one of the Mistwanderers listed in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I don't want to say too much, just in case it's a spoiler or whatever. Plus you can see the Faran video, but essentially Faran is very closely linked to Azalin for reasons that you'll find out if you watch that video. For now though, I thought I'd do a dedicated video because what happened was I asked on Reddit, on the Ravenloft subreddit, what are some great minions and lieutenants that Azalin would have? And I had a fantastic response there from a few people. So huge thank you as always to the folks there. And what I thought I'd do is I'd run them all a bit more closely, talk about things like we can get information from them, art potentially, what stat blocks I consider and where I'm considering using them and putting them in my campaign. And let's start with potentially the biggest and the baddest of them all. Am I going to pronounce this correctly? Ebbasheyth, also known as Ebb for short. She is a black shadow dragon. Ho ho ho. And apparently she is Azalin's steed as well, if you will. Like Azalin rides around on her, that's great. So she is a black shadow dragon who is, as well as appearing in the Old Lore, she appears in the more recent Ravenloft Mist Hunters modules, the Adventurers League stuff. She might appear in a couple of others, but I know for a fact she definitely appears in number 12, that's Beneath the New Star, and the extended play number 2, A Darklord's Denouement. So it appears right at the end. Beneath the New Star has a stat block for her that pegs her as an ancient Black Shadow Dragon. I was originally considering making her an adult Black Shadow Dragon, but my player's a pretty high level, and it was going to be a fight where it's just her on her own. So maybe I should use an ancient one and give my players a proper challenge. My plan for her, and I talk about this in the Faran video, is on their way to fight Darklord Rex, who they think is going to be the BEG. So they kind of go to the Darkon for the end game and approach him. They will get to this kind of ruined settlement village to paint Darklord Rex as a real monster on their way to where Darklord is, and Ebb will appear and attack them, and she'll be waiting. I do have a plan for her to retreat halfway through. She takes a lot of damage. If she's killed there, she's killed there. If she retreats, I don't know, maybe she could reappear as a boss just before Azalin. Maybe she'll help the players. I think that's kind of talked about in the extended play Ravenloft Mist Hunters, where I think they ride on her to somewhere and she actually helps them. That could be quite interesting. Next up we have Skeever. Now Skeever is mentioned as a imp who follows around Faran as well. So when Faran... I don't want to say too much in this video, I want you to watch the other video. But when the thing happens with Faran and Azalin returns, I'm not sure what to do about Skeever. Maybe it's a different version of Skeever, or maybe Skeever disappears at that point, I'm not sure. But Skeever is an imp that takes the form of a piebald raven. That's one of the ravens that's like black with patches of white. And I mean, imps are low level, but they can be invisible. They can do some stuff. So my cat's meowing in the background. She might visit me in a minute. That'd be good because she hasn't visited one of my videos for ages. Next up we have Axrock. Axrock sounds awesome. Axrock is a dwarven vampire blacksmith, and I quote, construct crafter. So nice. There's a lot going on in that sentence. Is a dwarf who's a vampire, who's also a blacksmith, and likes to make magic items for Azalin apparently, and makes constructs as well. Stat block wise, I suppose you could make it a vampire but make tweaks to make it small instead of medium, and give him dwarven traits. I feel like I saw an official vampire stat block, a dwarf vampire stat block, 5th edition somewhere. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, if anyone knows where it is, please let me know. Otherwise, I've seen some bouncing around online. If it were me, I'd probably just adapt the vampire one. And I'd love to give him a dwarven thrower as a weapon as well, which reminds me of like Thor's hammer from the Marvel stuff. And maybe some other magic items as well. He crafts magic items for Azalin. He's probably crafted some for himself as well. I think I did read somewhere that in old editions, dwarven vampires can't use magic items. Correct me if I'm wrong. But, you know, you might want to change that, and it might be different in 5th edition anyway. And then the constructs that he makes, they're called Doom Guards or Dread Guards. I don't know if there's a 5th edition equivalent. Maybe someone's created a stat block somewhere. But you could consider maybe animated armors, helmed horrors, those kinds of constructs, because they kind of look like empty suits of armor with weapons. Maybe that's what you could use. And my plan for Axrock is when my players then try and tackle Azalin. He's going to be at the King's Tier, which is the star above Dark Armor. You're going to have basically this giant amber dungeon that's floating in the air above Castle Avernus. And the only way to get to it is through Castle Avernus, or the ruins of Castle Avernus. Is it Avernus or Avernus? I've heard both pronunciations. Sorry, I tend to jump between both. And Axrock will be there waiting for them. Maybe he's in the middle of crafting a weapon, and then they've got to fight him. Elzarath. She's described as being the castle's seneschal, that's a fun one to pronounce, which I think are basically like stewards or main sort of assistants to whoever the king or queen or the leader of the castle essentially is. And you could just use a ghost, but I recently did a video talking about monsters from Tome of Beasts that work really well in Ravenloft, and one of them is called a Vengeful Spirit, and there's a beheaded variant. Maybe use that as an option. And similarly, it's an unnamed character, but in this Reddit thread somebody mentioned Valpurgeist, which is also acts, I think, as a seneschal, and for that, because they were hanged, essentially strangled, there is also a Vengeful Spirit variant, the Strangled variant, so that could be usable for that as well. Aquinus is another vampire. This one is described as being basically Azalin's executioner. So I'm picturing a vampire with the sort of black hood with a great axe like the headsman's axe as a minion. That just sounds rad straight off the bat. The next 3 are all from Ravenloft Mist Hunters and all appearing beneath the new star. They are 3 people who, when the whole thing happens with Azalin disappearing, they essentially want to either not necessarily be the replacements, but be the sort of lieutenants for whoever the replacement ends up being. One of them is a blackguard paladin, an elf oathbreaker called Samael Birchwood. Now I'm assuming it's pronounced Samuel because that's how it looks. It looks like the word Samuel, so maybe it's meant to be pronounced Samuel, but it's spelled Samael. The art, I should mention, they use, I noticed, was also art for an NPC in Dead and Thay. That's one of the Tales from the Yawning Portal adventures, so if you ever run that or plan to run that, bear that in mind. That's where they borrowed the art from, but the art is pretty cool. And this is essentially a blackguard who's dedicated his life to Azalin. The most appropriate stat block here would be the Blackguard, which is from Foedus Guide to Monsters, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse, or if you don't have access to that, you just use Knight from the Monster Manual. And my plan for Samael is I'm going to have him be one of the people who fights alongside Azalin in the final battle. So I think this is a cool thing where Azalin doesn't attack straight away and a few people attack first, and one of them will be Samael. And I'm even thinking of making him a member of the Circle. These are the group of knights from the Shadowlands run by Gondogal, or at least they are in the current iteration, present day if you will. And even though this isn't in the lore, this is kind of something I added. I really like the idea at one point where they hear about a member of the Circle who defected and joined Azalin, and then later on they fight this former member of the Circle and they fight Samael. Elzebeth Nirum is described as being an undead necromancer, but she is given the Deathlock Mastermind stat block. You can make her a Deathlock or Deathlock Mastermind both in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse, or maybe use the Necromancer stat block from Volo's Guide to Monsters, also updated in Monsters of the Multiverse, but maybe change it that she is undead. So she's not a, a live mortal humanoid, she is already undead. And information for her appears in Beneath the New Star as well. And there's also another seneschal who's described as being a major domo, which I think is the same as a seneschal, essentially a steward. She has only got the noble stat block, but I don't know, her name is Anastasia Dreyek. You might want to throw her in as well. But there's already quite a few of that nature. I'm probably going to omit her, but you might want to do something different. Mulger D'Ajust is another dwarven vampire, and this one's obsessed with the arcane. So maybe have used the vampire spellcaster stat block. The thing is, it's quite very similar to Strahd's stat block. So if you're doing like I'm doing sequel to Curse of Strahd, you may not want something too similar, unless you potentially change all the spells. That could spice it up a little bit. That may be the way to go. Foedus is a vassalich. Now, I don't think vassaliches appear in 5th edition, but apparently they are sort of lesser liches or mini liches created by a lich. So this is one that's being created by Azalin. I did find a pretty decent looking homebrew on the sort of D&D Beyond homebrew section. I typed in vassalich and there was one there. There's challenge rating 11. And apparently it's been adapted from Van Richten's Guide to the Lich, which is an old sort of 2nd edition, I want to say, information book. So that could be worth checking out. Otherwise, there are some weaker liches in other 5th edition modules, or maybe just make them a Deathlock Mastermind might be an easy way to go about it. Styrix is a night hag. There's a whole thing about Rift Spanner, where it's the device that can help people try and escape the Domains of Dread. So there's a lot more lore you can do with Styrix. I just like the idea of a night hag being there in the... I think she might be an ally of Darklord Rex. So when they go to fight Darklord Rex, who they think is a lich, but it's not a lich, and I explain all this in my Foran video. She's there as just one of the extra minions. She's allied with him because of Strahd disappearing. And he's trying to do this whole ritual. He doesn't say what it is. This is Darklord now. Trying to do this whole ritual. And maybe she's involved. Instead of doing the Rift Spanner thing, she's trying to help with the ritual. That's the way I'm thinking of including her. And if I don't include her there, I might include her somewhere else. Maybe as the lead up to Azalin, or maybe she's there during the Azalin battle. For the last 3 named people, and then I'll go on to just sort of talk about some more general monsters that feel very Azalin. They're all members of the Kargat. The Kargat are the Darkon secret police made up mostly of vampires. All 3 of them I'm going to talk about are leaders of the Kargat from different editions. But where I'm going to go is I'm going to use the 5th edition leader, and then have the other 2 as basically the second in command, if you will, sort of in hierarchy. So let's talk about the 5th edition one first. That is Alcio Metus. For those of you who know the older lore, she's the sister of Baron Metus. Baron Metus was the vampire that killed the Van Richten's son, Erasmus, and is the first vampire that Van Richten killed and was the start of his vampire and monster hunting journey. Alcio, obviously, for this reason, hates Van Richten's guts and probably wants to get revenge. She is one of the 3 inheritors of Darkon with Azalin's disappearance. She's a potential leader, along with Darklord Rex, who I've mentioned a few times. I used a stat block vampire warrior, but gave her a katana of wounding instead of just, I think it's a great sword. A katana, just to make things less complicated, I just treat it as a long sword. Say, just flavoured it as a katana. It's just same damage as a long sword. And my players met her at one point. She fought them but then retreated. And I still don't know how I'm going to include her in my campaign. I do really like the idea, actually, of when Azalin comes back and he orders her to attack the players, she just says no, because she liked the idea of being potential leader of Darkon, and if Azalin's defeated, she could potentially be the leader. Whether my players would stand for that, we'll see, but I do like the idea that it's not as simple as, oh yes, I'll just be another minion you fight. There's like a slight complication there. Lady Kazandra, who for some reason in another video I called Lady Kadanza. Don't know how I got that so wrong. She is a vampire. I think she was the leader in 3rd edition. And there's a tie-in to Annalik Ray as well. So apparently the reason she wears an eye patch is Annalik Ray is responsible for her losing her eye. So that's kind of a cool touch. And if you wanted to include her as like somebody who domain hops, a bit like when I talked about some of the minor villains who jump between domains, she'd be a good one because she could maybe appear in... Maybe she's followed Annalik Ray to Demonio and wants revenge for what happened to her eye and wants to take him out. So if your players end up in Demonio and meet Annalik, maybe Lady Kazandra is a mini-boss they have to fight. And there's also the Kargat leader from 2nd edition, I believe, is called Tavelia. And she just looks like that classic vampire in the vampire gown in her art. She's described as being... I saw multiple descriptions. So she's a Nosferatu. So could use the Nosferatu stat block from Van Richten's Guide. Or use Vampire Spellcaster stat block from the Monster Manual. Again, like I said earlier, it's very similar to Strahd's stat block, but you could mix up the spells just to make it a bit more interesting. And that's it for all the named people. I just wanted to mention a few other people you could potentially throw at the players that just feel very sort of, I don't know, feel very sort of Azalin minion-esque, if you will. Firstly, and I talk about this in my 8 Minor Villains video, a Skull Lord. Skull Lords appear in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. These are really weird, funny, quirky... I say these, it's one creature, but with 3 heads. So I feel like you can kind of refer to them as them because there's 3 of them in one body, essentially. But these are 3 arguing skulls. They are pretty tough, and they have minions as well. And it says in the stat block, I believe, they can cast a bunch of spells. They're good fun. I dumped one in after Volkovnir had been liberated, so Foedus had been defeated. He just strolled in from the mists, through the mists from Darkon, and was like, I'm bored, I want to cause some chaos. So that was quite a fun, just random battle to have. Grim Jester, who I mentioned in my Tome of Beasts video. I don't think Azalin has a Jester as a lieutenant or a minion, but this stat block was a lot of fun, really interesting, and, you know, it makes sense. He's got a paladin, he's got a seneschals, and people like that fighting under him. Why not throw in a Jester? It could be fun. Lich Hound was another one I mentioned in that video from Tome of Beasts. Azalin's a Lich, throw in a Lich Hound, makes sense. And when I was researching just general sort of, you know, what minions would a Lich have, I found a number of Reddit posts, and most people said, he's got to have a Death Knight. Throw in a Death Knight, and I've not used a Death Knight yet. There is actually one in the magic item Luber's Talk of Souls. I did a whole video talking about that. My players have that at the moment, and sometimes when it gets used, a monster exits the cards, and the most dangerous monster from that is the Death Knight, and they haven't unleashed the Death Knight yet, but they've unleashed most of the monsters, so it's only a matter of time where this really tough Death Knight will escape. So, and I don't know, so I'm probably going to hold off on that in case they release the Death Knight, but also, if you have plans to use Lord Soth, who is a very famous Death Knight, probably, I said earlier, Ostrad's the most famous Ravenloft villain, followed by Azalin, then probably followed by Lord Soth, although there's a whole argument of, is he actually a Ravenloft villain? Because he actually belongs to another setting, which I won't go into here. But if you plan to use Lord Soth in your Ravenloft campaign, you might want to save him, save the Death Knight stat block for that. And some lesser minions you could consider are Deathlock and Deathlock Mastermind make a lot of sense. They feel very Azalin-esque. Fext as well, which is another one from Tome of Beasts. Both Deathlock and Fexts are kind of like warlock patrons who are then transformed. I think the Deathlock is a punishment, and with Fext it's people who volunteer themselves so wholly to their patron that they get transformed. Both of these fit, because Azalin is a suggested patron for the undead subclass, which I think is in Van Richten's guide. He suggests as a potential patron, so you could have Deathlocks and Fexts working for Azalin. It makes sense. And he's a Lich. Any and all undead is fair game, I think. He'd have zombies, he'd have skeletons, he'd have wights. What are they called? Ghost Knights, I think I mentioned. Also in my Tome of Beasts video, which are like tougher versions of, you know, skeletons and wights. Any of those are fair game. Go to town. And that's it for this one. Upcoming Ravenloft videos. As I record this, we still haven't finished Forlorn, and I did a Forlorn Part 1 video a while back. Forlorn Part 2 will be talking just about Castle Tristan Noira, which I ran pretty much straight out of Castles Forlorn. Should be fun to cover. I'm also going to give a quick demo in Roll20 of how I set up the maps, because I have had a couple of people reach out to me and say, oh, I was thinking of running Castles Forlorn soon, how did you handle the maps? And the answer is not very easily. It was a lot of work, but it's worth it, I think. And I'll show some things I did, and hopefully it'll help other DMs who are thinking of running that, whether as a one-shot, whether as a part of a domain hopping campaign like I've done. And what else have I got coming up? I want to do more NPC videos, people like Gondogal and Alanic Gray, who I've mentioned in various other videos, but maybe give them their own dedicated video where I dig deeper. Maybe I should do the video just about Azalin. I was thinking of maybe doing a video just about Alcio and the Kargat. We'll see though, because I've talked about them a lot in this video. I guess we'll see how it goes. Thank you, Miss Wanderers.